I'm Kevin Nicholas. I'm based at Monash University in Melbourne. And our research really focuses on looking for better strategies to deal with the health challenges of significantly preterm babies in the NICU. So these babies present with limited brain, gut and lung development, and it's again a significant challenge for neonatologists, in fact, to manage those babies through to a point where they're more independent. So at the moment those babies receive ideally some colostrum from the mother. Certainly it's far superior if they're breastfed or receive breast milk from the mother or from a milk bank. But we know that's not sufficient for these babies. They need an increased plane of nutrition, so we need to use fortifiers as well. So that improves the nutritional supply to those babies. But we feel that in order to improve the functionality of those tissues, which are quite deficient, we need to use new strategies to try and address that problem. You know, I guess the way we go about that, in fact, is to use a comparative approach. So what we've been doing is studying an Australian marsupial. It's the Tama wallaby. Now, the interesting thing about these animals is that they have a very short gestation. They give birth to a particularly immature altricial young, and then the mother progressively changes the composition of milk. And we know this is important for driving the development of the young. The young is actually born far less mature than any human baby you would see in the NICU. And what the mother does is provide milk with an appropriate composition, both to protect that young, it's immune incompetent at the time, and also to drive development to a point where that animal is more independent. And when it reaches that stage, the mother then again changes the composition of milk to increase the nutritional plane of that milk and allow that animal to grow. So in effect, that's really what we'd like to see happening in the NICU. So if we can understand that model, and particularly how the mother delivers what's required for that kind of development, we can take that information over to the human and see whether we can find better ways to manage it in humans. I guess the best model we can work with, in fact, is the lung. So we find in that first 100 days, the mother sends in signals in the milk from about day 20 to about day 100. And we know there are bioactives in the milk at that stage that directly interact with the lung. They make the lung grow, they make the lung differentiate, they make it start to produce more surfactant, which is clearly important for those babies. And we're starting to understand the mechanisms of how that happens. And so it's that sort of temporal delivery of bioactives that's so important. And clearly that's quite relevant to the way we think about how we would treat human babies in the NICU. The changes we see in marsupial milk is quite profound. We'll see some changes potentially in human milk where the breast is subjected to challenge, it may be mastitis or whatever. We'll see a short-term response. So we do see some changes, but not really in terms of developmentally regulating the growth of the baby. I think that our argument is that in the human we have a much longer gestation and there's much more opportunity to provide the kind of stimulation that's required for development. And then we have a relatively short lactation period. So we've argued that in fact the placenta, the amniotic fluid can start to deliver more bioactivity that regulates that development preterm, and so there's less requirement postnatally to address the issues that we've discussed. But I guess what's happened when we looked in the wallaby during the first 100 days postpartum, we took all the putative bioactives in the milk at that stage and we went across the human and we said, okay, there's a continuum of signalling in the human. Placenta, amniotic fluid, colostrum and milk. Where are we going to find that being delivered in the human? And in a sense, nature threw us a curveball because we found most of it in the colostrum. Yes, there's some present in amniotic fluid and the placenta, and interestingly there's also some present in the milk. How that's occurred in evolutionary terms we really don't know yet, but the reality is in practical terms, in translational terms, we now have something we can aim our arrows at. We can interrogate colostrum. Everyone knows that colostrum is good for a baby, but do we know how good it is? And do we know why it's as good as it is? Well, certainly it tells us that the best thing we can do for those babies is to provide colostrum, where that's possible. Now, of course, that's not always possible. So what we're trying to do is to go into the colostrum, find those factors, and then take them out and test them and see whether they're going to have any sense of efficiency when we test them in models of animals where you do get preterm births. So it's not possible, it's not technically possible right now to have colostrum banks. We can't bank colostrum and then bring it out. It's far too valuable. Every baby should see some colostrum. But what we can do is go into that colostrum and find what is important for the development of these babies, and we can take that out and we can look for ways to actually add that to fortifiers. So what we're saying is these fortifiers have a job, I suppose, in a sense, of improving the nutritional plane for these babies. Now we want to add something on top of that that really doesn't impact on that nutritional plane, but provides the opportunity to stimulate, in a sense, those tissues that need it at that stage. So in fact they can actually utilise the nutrition they're being provided with. It's great if we can give them colostrum, but we need to go one step beyond that. We need to find out why the colostrum is so good and how it's doing what it's doing. And when we do that, we'll have other alternatives to go across to those fortifiers and enhance those fortifiers with the kinds of bioactives we find in colostrum.